the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
from the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
Welcome you to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're really digging into some major recent events involving the U.S. and Iran. Specifically, these U.S. military strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities.
Yeah, pretty significant development.
We've looked at reports from a few places, the Daily Wire, the Daily Caller, PJ Media, trying to, piece together what happened.
Different perspectives in there for sure.
Exactly. So our goal here is just to pull out the key information for you, help you understand the events, the different takes on what it all means, short-term and maybe long-term too.
And importantly, we're sticking to what the sources say, not taking sides, just laying out the information reported.
Right. Okay, let's get into it. So this whole thing seems to really kick off with a deadline President Trump set. The Daily Caller mentioned this, 60 days for Iran to reach a nuclear deal.
Yeah, and a very specific condition attached. No uranium enrichment allowed under any deal. That was the line.
That became a problem, didn't it? How did the talks go?
Well, they seemed to slow right down. Tehran indicated they were pretty committed to having what they termed civilian-grade enrichment.
Civilian-grade, okay.
Which, sounds peaceful for power plants and such, but it uses the same basic technology that could be pushed further to weapons grade.
Ah, right. So that created a sticking point.
A major one. A complete deadlock, really, given the president's firm stance against any enrichment.
Okay, so the deadline passes, 60 days, and then day 61, what happens?
Israel strikes Iran. That's according to the Daily Caller, citing Reuters. They reported Israel hit Iranian nuclear sites.
And there was more, right? A casualty.
Yes. They confirmed the killing of a top commander from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, in that first wave.
The IRGC. That's a big deal, isn't it? Not just the regular army.
Exactly. They're a very powerful, ideologically driven force within Iran, deeply involved in the regime's regional activities, proxy forces, things like that. Targeting a top commander sends a very strong message.
Definitely an escalation.
Yeah.
And Trump's reaction, he posted on Truth Social.
He did. Pretty quickly after the Israeli strikes, one post said, today is day 61. I told them what to do, but they just couldn't get there. Now they have perhaps a second chance.
A second chance. Interesting phrasing. Was there another post?
Yeah, another one read, Iran must make a deal before there is nothing left and save what was once known as the Iranian Empire. No more death, no more destruction. Just do it before it's too late. God bless you all. Quite direct.
Very direct. So, Israel strikes, Trump posts. What's Iran's move?
Well, the day before the U.S. eventually launched its own attacks, this would have been Friday, again reported by Reuters via the Daily Caller, Iran came out and said it would not negotiate on its nuclear program.
Even while Israel was still hitting them.
Apparently so. Even as Israeli forces continue to, quote, hammer the Islamic Republic. That refusal to negotiate seems to have really set the stage for the next step.
Which was the U.S. stepping in directly.
Right. Saturday night, June 21st, 2025. President Trump addresses the nation.
And announces
that the United States military had bombed Iran's key nuclear facilities.
Which one specifically?
The sources mentioned Natanz and Esfahan, and also the primary target at Fordo, described by the president as Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities.
Okay. And the military side of this is pretty fascinating. The weapon used, the bunker buster.
Yeah, the massive ordnance penetrator, or MOP. CNN, reported via the Daily Caller, described it as being specifically designed for reaching and destroying our adversaries' weapons of mass destruction located in well-protected facilities. Think deep underground bunkers.
And how did they deliver it?
This is key. CNN also reported, and PJ Media elaborated, that the only aircraft capable of carrying this MOP is the U.S. B-2 Spirit bomber.
The stealth bomber.
Exactly. PJ Media specifically mentions 6 U.S. B-2s were involved, intercontinental manned strategic bombers.
And this capability, is it unique to the U.S.?
That's what PJ Media states quite explicitly. They say Israel couldn't have taken out these specific sites because they lack anything like the MOPs carried by the B-2s.
So for these deeply buried targets, it really had to be the U.S. military involved.
That appears to be the assessment presented in that source, yes. The specific tool for that specific job.
And how did Trump describe the outcome?
He called it a spectacular military success. said Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
Completely and totally obliterated. Strong words.
Very strong. He also reported all U.S. planes returned safely, and during the address, he was flanked by VP J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Rubio, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
So a unified front, presenting this as a decisive victory.
That was certainly the image projected, declaring total success right away. It's worth noting we don't have independent verification of the extent of the damage from these sources, just the president's assessment.
Understood. Did he give a rationale, a justification for the strikes in his address?
He did. He framed it in a much broader historical context, casting Iran as a long-standing aggressor.
How so?
He said, for 40 years, Iran has been saying, death to America, death to Israel. He brought up casualties, saying they have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty.
So linking it directly to past violence against Americans.
Yes, and connecting it to wider regional conflict. He stated, we lost over 1,000 people and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of the hate.
So the message to Iran now was?
Pretty clear. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. That was the quote.
But also a warning.
A very stern one. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
And did he follow up on that? Maybe on Truth Social again?
He did, reinforce the warning. Said if Iran attacks U.S. personnel, the response will be with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight.
Okay, so suggesting there's more potential action.
Yes, he indicated many targets left. He called the strike that night the most difficult of them all, but added that if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill, and most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes.
Wow. And he also commented on the U.S. military's role in this specifically.
He did, emphasizing U.S. capability. He asserted, there's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close.
Okay, so that's the strike, the rationale, the warnings. What about the immediate reactions? International.
Well, the Daily Caller reported a quick response from the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen.
The group that's been active in the Red Sea.
That's them. A Houthi political bureau member, Hizam al-Assad, posted on X simply, Trump must bear the consequences, a direct threat.
So immediate blowback, at least rhetorically. But some sources focused elsewhere, right, domestically.
Yes, this is where PJ Media's perspective comes in quite strongly. They shift the focus dramatically, arguing that the real danger, the grimmer toll, might actually happen here in the U.S.
How do they make that connection?
They link it directly to border security, specifically blaming what they call the open border policies of the Biden administration.
Okay, so connecting the Iran strikes to perceived vulnerabilities at the U.S. border.
Exactly. They suggest this increases the threat from Iranian operatives or sleeper cells inside the U.S. They note this concern isn't new, saying it ramped up after the U.S. killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani back in January 2020.
Who they describe how?
As the mastermind of Iran's terrorism operations. PJ Media is also quite critical of other media outlets, accusing them of not covering what they see as the seriousness of this alleged threat of Iranian sleeper cells.
And do they offer specifics to back this claim about border vulnerability?
They cite an October 2024 report from the House Homeland Security Committee. Now, according to PJ Media's account of this report, it claimed millions of inadmissible aliens were released into the U.S. without adequate vetting under the previous administration.
Released without vetting.
And it also mentioned roughly 2 million more who entered as known gotaways, meaning they avoided Border Patrol entirely. The report, as cited, apparently stated, there is no way to know how many more potential national security threats are now at large.
That's a strong claim from that committee report, as presented by PJ Media. Does it mention terrorism specifically?
Yes, the source says the committee report claimed over 390 individuals on the terrorist watch list were apprehended at the borders between FY 2021 and late 2024, a huge percentage increase compared to the prior 4 years.
A 3,000% increase.
That's the figure cited by PJ Media from the report. It also apparently mentioned apprehensions from over 160 countries, including state sponsors of terrorism, and called DHS screening wholly inadequate.
So, based on that interpretation of the report, PJ Media paints a pretty dire picture of potential domestic threats.
They do. They explicitly imagine scenarios like suicide bombings at the Capitol, in public places, mass shootings in major cities, really quite alarming hypotheticals.
And they suggest it's not just Iran.
Right. They mention the possibility of other extremist Muslim groups having sleeper cells, a revived ISIS threat, and even bring up Chinese nationals.
Chinese nationals, how do they connect that?
They mention a claim of at least 20,000 young Chinese males crossing the border during the Biden era, and then describe China as a dangerous adversary and, crucially, one of Iran's most significant allies. So sort of linking multiple perceived threats through the border issue.
Do they think the current administration is prepared for this potential threat they describe?
They acknowledge that Attorney General Bondi, FBI Director Patel, and Homeland Security Secretary Noam have been preparing, but they question if there's been enough time to grasp the actual depth of the threat, suggesting preparations may prove insufficient.
So their conclusion is?
Quite pointed. PJ Media asserts that Trump's decision to strike Iran could well prove to be the most significant of his presidency. And conversely, that it is all but certain that the worst of Joe Biden's decisions was opening the U.S. border, linking the two very directly.
Wow. Okay, so that's a very different angle on the implications compared to the immediate military success narrative.
Definitely. A stark contrast between the president's declaration of obliteration and success and this source's prediction of potential severe domestic consequences stemming from earlier policies.
What a deep dive this has been. We've gone from the diplomatic breakdown and the deadline through the Israeli strikes, the major U.S. military action using those B-2s and MOPs,
to President Trump's very forceful address and warnings, and then these really contrasting views on the aftermath, immediate threats from groups like the Houthis versus these claims about significant domestic danger linked to border security.
It really lays out a complex picture.
It does, and it really raises a question for you, listening. You have this assertive military action presented as a total success. Then you have this other perspective heavily focused on potential domestic blowback tied to border concerns. How do you weigh these different narratives? What resonates more or what concerns you the most when you process all this information?